This is Terrible Parables, a podcast of Mockingbird Ministries, in which a Bible scholar, a pastor, and an anxious Christian look for some good news and passages of Scripture that are difficult, frightening, or particularly, well, terrible. I'm your host, Callie Yee, and in a little bit I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Todd Brewer and Brian Jarrell. Join us as we find that sometimes the spooky things that go bump in the night are just figments of our imaginations. From James 2. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill," and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I by my works will show you my faith. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you senseless person, that faith apart from works is barren? Was not our ancestor Abraham justified by works when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was brought to completion by the works. Thus the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Likewise, was not Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another road? For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is also dead. I think I have a pretty good idea of why this passage is so terrible. And one of the things is it appears to directly maybe contradict what Paul says in his letters. I don't know if that's the correct take, but that's...
Welcome to the age-old question of the book of James, right? The sense of, we've got all these other writings in the New Testament, particularly ones from Paul, and he says, it's all about faith. It's all about faith, and works are secondary. And if you don't have the faith, then what's the point? And now here comes along James, and he says, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? You need works too, right? And it's sort of a recipe for confusion if you just sort of give it the glimpse and don't spend time with it. You're like, well, which is it, faith or works?
Yeah. Or if you just read it like out of context, not within the whole New Testament.
True. You know who really had a problem with James?
Is his name rhyme with Truther?
Lartin Luther. It rhymes with Lartin
Spartan
Luther.
Luther.
Yes, Martin Luther had a real problem with James. The quote from him that gets a lot of kind of press is that, it is an epistle of straw. And that's, he said that. But it mostly gets pressed because it that falls in a writing of Luther that's more popular. But like elsewhere in Luther's copious amounts of writing, he's not quite like that. Epistle of straw is more tame than what he says elsewhere.
Okay.
So in the 1530s, I forget the exact date, he's doing, he says once that the Epistle of James gives us much trouble, for the papists embrace it alone and leave out all the rest. I've tried to convince them, but if I can't convince them, I am happy to throw St. Jimmy in the fire.
Whoa.
Dang. Wow.
And as time goes on, he actually does throw St. Jimmy in the fire. So if you look at Wittenberg Bibles that were printed in Luther's lifetime, James is relegated to this kind of sub-canonical New Testament Apocrypha status. He has the listing of all of the New Testament texts, except for James and Jude and Revelation. So in all the other writings that are legitimately New Testament, according to Luther, the authors are designated as St. Paul's letter to the Romans, or the Gospel according to St. Matthew, or the Gospel according to St. John. But when it comes to these 4 texts that that are sort of indented, offset, and further down on the page and taken out of the canonical order, they're just boom, booted to the end. Those are said to be the letter to the Hebrews, or James's letter to the Hebrews. In other words, there is no saint designation.
Oh, okay.
So now, does he do that because he's not sure this James is like the official canonical Saint James? Is that part of why he does it? Or is it more just out of sort of curmudgeonly theological conviction that he sort of sets it off to the side like that?
Yeah.
So some of it is he doesn't think it was written by an actual James.
Okay.
And some of it is theology. So he, I would sort of call it like Luther's mortal sin. Luther's venial sin is his translation of Romans. One is not justified by faith, and he supplies the word alone in his translation. That's a venial sin. Interpretive makes sense. The mortal sin is he does remake the New Testament canon, so that James and Hebrews and Jude and Revelation are all downgraded into this kind of sub-canonical apocryphal status. Yeah. They're still printed, but they're out of order. They're not written by saints, and they're sort of put to the end as if maybe you want to read these, maybe you don't. You don't have to.
Yeah.
One of the big critiques that Luther has about James is that one of the reasons why he feels, I think, comfortable in doing this is because he'll argue that everything you get in James, you can find elsewhere in the New Testament. Oh. Like here's, if you look at, it's going to be helpful for us to look at a wider view of James. And if you break down James, here's a handful of themes that are really important in James' epistle. No favoritism for the wealthy, taming the tongue and sort of reining in your anger, because that's really bad. Warning against being in the world. Boasting about tomorrow and sort of thinking the future is yours while not recognizing that, like, it's not yours, it's God's. And hypocrisy, this question of are you hearers or doers of the word? And, there's a compelling point to be made that every single one of those themes can be found elsewhere in what Luther would have called the major books of the Bible. Okay. But Luther's other sort of key gripe is that when you look at the major books of the Bible that outline the gospel and good news, well, you don't find a lot of that in James. It seems to lean so far into the ethical that it's harder to sort of get the good news of the gospel out of it. Now, I don't think I always agree with Luther on all of these things, and I certainly, as a pastor, affirm the canonicity of the epistle to James. James can really scratch this itch of, what do I have to do to please God? And if you don't read it canonically with the rest of the New Testament, you can walk away thinking, well, here's how I need to behave, perform, to get God's love for me. And I think that's the trouble. I mean, the difference between us saying that about James versus some of the other parables we do is just James is a longer book. Yeah. And so it's a heavy thing to level a larger chunk of scripture. That doesn't mean that's not how people use it. Yeah. And I think it has limited virtue if you're going to use it as an ethical stance. But there are better uses for it than that. And I think we'll get to that as we discuss it more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so we've read James 2 as our kind of highlighted portion, but I think James more broadly poses many questions that are very difficult to harmonize with Paul. So, for example, James calls the law the perfect law of liberty. Now, Paul would never say such a thing. In fact, Paul said it's the opposite. Paul associates the law with bondage. Paul associates the law by way of sin with death. So,
but James refers to law as
liberty.
Liberty.
Another example is that Paul seems to think that the law can be summarized in those who love. Those who love fulfill the law. And James goes out of his way to say, well, if you love but you show partiality, you have not fulfilled the law.
Yeah.
And so there are, in addition to the citation of Abraham, Paul goes out of his way not to cite Genesis 22 and the Abraham story of the binding of Isaac.
Yeah.
For Paul, the Genesis 15 is actually what's the kind of high point.
What's Genesis 15?
It's the section James quotes. Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So for Paul, Genesis 15 is the high point of 15 and 17. The promise is the high point of the Abraham narrative. That's where justification by faith came from.
Okay.
Right.
Is from the Abraham story, and his omission of Genesis 22 is intentional. In other words, he's offering a reading of the Genesis Abrahamic narrative that selects one and omits another.
Because if you put in the other, it would be kind of like by works as well.
Exactly. So James offers a counter reading to Paul's reading, which accords with how some other people in that time were understanding of Abrahamic narrative. It accords with how some people in that time understood the Abrahamic narrative, namely that this promise given to Abraham that he receives in faith is actually fulfilled with the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22 with his works. And that's precisely the reading that James offers. So James is in some senses echoing readings of the Abrahamic narrative that are mirrored elsewhere. And Jewish thinkers of that time. So there are a number of places where James and Paul would sort of agree, and there are some places where they seem to be directly butting heads with one another.
Yeah, which is interesting why it would be included within the canon, having it. Yeah, I don't know. That's just interesting.
You're kind of picking up on some of the trouble that Christians have had throughout the centuries and millennia, working with these two particular books, because they do tend to present, apostles' teaching in conflict. It's not the first time, right? Like if you read through Galatians, you'll see that Peter and Paul have conflicts, right? They don't agree about whether it's okay to join Gentiles and Jewish Christians together at the same table. And Paul sort of gets on Peter for it, right? And then later on when you read Peter will sort of jab at Paul and say things like, listen to Paul on this. Like he's a little convoluted, right? But listen to him.
2 Peter 3:16.
Yeah. And so it's not to say that our struggle here is to say that like the apostles are in conflict or teaching different things. I think the question is what do you do with the fact that the apostles are teaching these things, and how does that apply to the regular Christian?
So how do we grapple with the differences between what James believes, faith with works, and what Paul believes of faith apart from works? Like how do we grapple with that? How do we hold them together and not like stress?
So I think there's 4 ways of looking at it. So the first is you offer a kind of historical reading, which is James represented Jewish Christianity, Paul represented Gentile Christianity, and Gentile Christianity won the day. And so these two were sort of early representations of early Christian communities.
It kind of feels like the difference between Luke's gospel and Matthew's gospel.
Right. Or John's gospel and Matthew's gospel. Yeah. These are sort of two different, and that's the kind of Walter Bauer,
Here's Walter Bauer.
19th century German theologian.
Okay.
You sort of look at it as history and you say, well, I like Paul. And in that construct, what matters is history and not canon.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that's one way of dealing with it.
Right. It's almost like two rival factions of Christianity and how Christianity is going to grow and be expressed. And this is sort of the vestige, the remains of kind of that element of early Christianity. And that's one way of looking at it, which I think has its problems, but we'll keep going.
Yeah. The second is to say, no, canon is important. And you say these can't be harmonized. And the canon actually itself represents a diversity of faiths.
That doesn't feel like a solution at all.
That's the second way. There's two more ways.
Yeah,
still,
sorry.
right?
So no, I mean, at the World Council of Churches, the German theologian Ernst Käsemann gave a fairly infamous paper that said the New Testament itself testifies to the diversity of modern Christianity. In other words, you can find justification for any branch of Christianity within the New Testament itself.
Okay.
And so that's sort of one way of saying it is that in the same way, we shouldn't try to harmonize the Gospels. We shouldn't try to harmonize James and Paul. They're just different, and maybe they represent different approaches to faith, and maybe there's some utility with one and the other at different times. You can sort of create a dialectic as to I'm a James Christian now and I'm a Paul Christian later or something like that. But you try not to harmonize them.
You avoid the uncomfortability of it.
Right. And you just sort of embrace the plurality.
Right.
So that's the second one. The third is you say you try to harmonize. And that is a possible one. And many people do harmonize. Brian?
That's kind of where I lean. Is I happen to think there's a lot more to. They may be using different language to talk about the same issue, or perhaps they're using different language and talking about the issues that different church communities are facing. Right? Paul's writing to churches who are. They're so committed to issues of works righteousness that he needs to really lean into grace. And then James is writing to churches that are so sort of baked into these stagnant ways of living that they've heard the gospel, but it hasn't borne fruit in ways that make sense to their living, right?
Okay.
Like people who hear the gospel, like it does end up over time, right? Like we're not going to be too prescriptive about this, but like, favoritism for the wealthy, that's not a gospel thing. And it's a theme in James. James is like, and so you got James trying to grab people by the lapels and shake them out of this.
Yeah.
And the way that you would do that is to say, well, you might look at, for example, James uses the book of Hebrews. James uses two examples from Genesis in the Old Testament. He uses Abraham and the binding of Isaac, but he also uses the story of Rahab the prostitute. And this is from the story of book of Joshua and the conquering of Jericho, right? Rahab hears the stories of what God is doing for Israel as Israel is coming in to conquer the promised land. And she becomes, in essence, a spy and helps the spies and shields them from discovery. Yeah. And her family are saved as a result. If you go to the book of Hebrews, it's literally by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, who had received the promises as an act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac your offspring shall be named. And so you have this moment where, like when describing Abraham and what he did, it's by faith. But then he goes on to say almost immediately after that, by faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And so if James is going to say, well, our example of what it means to be a Christian looks like Abraham and Rahab, And the author of Hebrews is going to say Abraham and Rahab. One is saying by faith, the other is saying by works, but they're both pointing to the same person and saying, this is what it means to have a godly life.
Brian, that just sounds like you're agreeing with James. That's not a harmony. It just sounds like you're agreeing with James.
There is, well, what's
Feels
James's
a bit
thing,
like a
right?
harmony to me.
I mean, because it's the sense of we believe that grace produces fruit, right? We believe that what the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies. And so as you internalize the gospel and understand it, like there are behavior changes that come from that and works that are the fruits of that. So when James is over here saying, faith without works is dead, I think he's talking to a community where you can sort of say, you say you're a Christian, but I don't see anything Christian about you as a community, and we need to shift gears here.
Yeah.
I don't know that necessarily says it's faith alone that saves. I think what James is essentially saying is, well, I mean, you say you have faith, but I'm not sure you do because I don't see the works.
He's speaking to a different audience.
And there's dangers in taking this too far as well, right? Because then you get into the Protestant work ethic where it's like, well, now you have to prove that you're good and saved by doing all your works. And there's ways the snake kind of proverbially eats its tail here. I don't know that we do ourselves a service by being grace-centered Christians by sort of also saying like we need some sort of paradigm here to figure out whether, someone can say they're a Christian, but they're actually not. We do that intuitively anyway. And so I don't know that I see James as necessarily being at odds with Paul's formula about salvation by grace. I do think that if you're going to look through and say we need some sort of dividing line to say what is a Christian and what isn't a Christian, I think James is trying to do that here because the behaviors of the church that James is writing to, this diaspora, aren't lining up with what Jesus wants for us to be. So that's my best shot at getting number 3 and aligning them together. And I think you have a fourth option as well.
So to add a little bit, I think in the harmonization approach, part of what they do, what I've heard from Reformed types quite frequently, is that James's definition of faith and Paul's definition of faith are not the same.
Yeah, that's. I should have said more to that end. That's kind of the classic reading of this is they're using the word to mean different things.
Right. So that the kind of faith Paul talks about, he can gloss as obedience, Romans 1:5. And that's very different from the kind of faith that James defines as somehow also being true of demons who believe. Paul would never say that demons believe. And so the faith works contrast between James and Paul are in a sense talking using the same words but very differently.
Okay.
So that's how the harmonization kind of approach often works. Mine is a kind of canon conscious version of the first alternative, which is to say, I don't think it's likely that James wrote James first. And it's more likely that James is written in the 2nd century, responding to interpreters of Paul, whom James, whoever that author is, had sort of gone too far, kind of Pauline extremists. Now,
would you call them antinomians by chance in the midst of that, Todd?
Of a stripe, yes. His name was. This one has there are a couple, but this one has a name. His name is Marcion.
Okay. So Marcion,
the 2nd century heretic who divided God and the Old and New Testaments into 2 different gods.
Yes.
Who have no relation to one another. But even if you don't go with the kind of 2nd century composition, its inclusion in the canon, say you think it's written in the 1st century sometime, it was included in the canon specifically because it found utility countering Marcion. In other words, there are no quotations of James within the first 200 years, 150, 200 years of Christianity. The first unequivocal reference is by the 3rd century Alexandrian theologian by the name of Origen. And he does so within the context of an anti-Marcionite polemic. At the same time, he recognizes that many people don't necessarily accept James. So if we're thinking about what books get in and why, James seems to get in or find greater traction because its utility in refuting a kind of extremist Paulinism, which divorces the Old and New Testaments from one another, divorces the Old Testament God from the New Testament God. And so James is quite useful in that context, whether it was written around that time or found utility during that time. I think one can be slightly agnostic about, even though I think it's more likely it was written at that time. There's a lot of other good reasons that I don't have time to get into.
Right.
Why that is. If you are listening and you think, Todd, I don't buy that one bit, there is a book that you should read before you email me your angry email, written by a David Ninehouse. It's spelled Neinhuis, and it's called Not by Paul Alone. And it's a book that lays out 2nd century sort of composition of James and the role of James as basically as trying to refute an extreme Paul. And so the way to understand, the argument he makes is the way to understand James isn't so much as something trying to refute Paul, nor as some independent of Paul testimony that we have to then, after the fact, harmonize. But to see James instead as someone who has Paul in front of him and has Marcion echoing in his ears, and he's trying to refute some of the excesses of Marcion.
What's going on in history at that time.
Right. And so for many epistles, right, when something is written, why it was written, are all valid questions to ask. And so in some senses, 2nd century as canon, why was this written? To refute Marcion. When was it written? 2nd century. By whom was it written? Who knows? Maybe some guy named James who lived 150 years after.
We threw around the big word of antinomianism. What does antinomianism mean?
Yeah, antinomianism is this idea that when you look at God's law and you look at the gospel, you sort of have this mental calculus that says, well, if God loves me and forgives me and gives me all of the grace that I need, then it no longer matters if I sin. And so you would then turn around and then excuse all sorts of unchristian behavior by saying, well, God has given it. Now, ask me how many antinomians there actually are in the world.
How many are there?
I would say if there are any, I could probably count them all on one hand.
Okay.
Because I think most people who would say, I can do whatever I want because God has forgiven me. I don't know that you find very many actual faithful Christian believers doing that. It's funny, Luther wrote in one of his prefaces to the Gospel of Galatians, he talked about how if you have the gospel within you, then the sort of behavior transfer that it becomes impossible not to happen at one point. And what Luther's trying to get at is he's trying to say that do works save you? No. Do Christians do good works? Yes. Do those good works save you? No. And I think that's when you look at antinomianism. That's why it's a fear more than a reality that someone's going to take the grace of God and use it to justify their bad behavior. Whereas if you really understand the grace of God, you don't use it to justify your own bad behavior. You want to add to that, Todd, in terms of what an antinomian is or isn't?
Yeah, I just I think Paul has some very kind of Paul understands that faith is active and living, and I think the accusation of antinomianism is a kind of self-defeating thing. It's sort of like a slur your enemies call you, and then you have to try to account for what it means. I don't think Paul is necessarily had any interest in addressing that question. I think James has interest in answering that question.
Yeah.
And I think that's why these two, and within the canon are sort of working, could perhaps work together.
Yeah.
But yeah, for Paul, faith does things, and and how could it not? And there's a dynamism there. But I think it's only with the distance of is like more institutionalizing of Christianity and a non-conversionary movement that 100 years after Paul, that the question of like Christians who are like Christians in name only has any kind of question to it or salience. But I also just don't like asking that question. I think it tends to be super legalistic, because the way people, one person's barometer for what faith is and what another person's barometer for what faith is are usually self-serving.
Yeah.
So,
and for the most part, the only people who use language of antinomians tend to be people who don't like the idea of grace. The reality is I think preaching a grace-filled gospel, let me rephrase that. I know that preaching a grace-filled gospel will do more to help people become who God wants them to be and to engender that living faith than any sort of moral exhortation we can come up with.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to James, because there's a lot of moral exhortation in here. And so, you can kind of see why Luther doesn't spend a lot of time with it or in it or around it.
Any other thoughts?
yeah, I think if you're just trying to harmonize James and Paul, you shouldn't. I think it's better to reinterpret James in light of Paul than the other way around.
Okay.
And I actually think that's part of why James is written.
Yeah.
Luther said, and I'm not willing to commit myself to this position, maybe, but he said that, in a word, James wanted to guard against those who relied on faith without works, but he was unequal to the task. And I think Luther sort of understands something about how the tension plays out and what James is trying to do. And I think unequal to the task for Luther probably means something like could outstrip Paul, or is of equal to Paul. And I don't think James is meant to be this kind of refutation of Paul.
It's supplemental to.
Right. It's a supplement of misuse in a very particular time frame. And I think it creates new possibilities within the canon. I think Paul was an antinomian. I think Paul has very little use of the law. Lutherans love to talk about the use of the law.
Yeah.
We are not under law. We are under grace.
Yeah.
Right.
And so in some senses, James is actually what forces Luther, by perhaps indirectly, to have an understanding of law that is like working and valid in everyday Christian's life.
Gotcha.
I think that's part of the difference, Todd, between what a scholar does and what a pastor does, right? Because I think a scholar has more of the flexibility to say, let's play fast and loose with the canon. But as a pastor, I don't have that same flexibility.
But I'm not playing fast and loose with the canon. I'm saying the canon has a particular shape.
Right.
And it's important to have that shape. Like, if you want to push me, I like.
Right,
so
right.
here's the thing.
No.
Like, to use another analogy.
Trying to push it.
To use another analogy, we have 4 gospels.
Right.
Trying to harmonize them on a historical basis is absolutely impossible.
Right. It's not.
Right.
Right.
And so in that sense, the canon
Right.
offers a way of its own way of interpreting.
Right, right.
And so I think, given the positioning of James and Paul, I think the inclusion of both in the same, like this wasn't included by an idiot.
Right.
Right.
Agreed.
It wasn't some at least weird political consensus.
Right.
Right. I think the shape of the canon has is its own interpretive sort of surplus and value to it.
I agree. Let me just point out, just to say, what I mean by that is I don't have like what Luther did, the authority to say, well, this wasn't necessarily written by a Saint James, right? Or it came later on. Because part of, at least in my tradition, and I think in a lot of traditions, the authority of what is canonical is supposed to be traced back
but
to
I'm not undermining
authority.
I'm not undermining authority.
That's a good point. You're not undermining
I'm
authority.
just giving it a completely different epistolatory context. I'm saying it's not 50 AD by James the Just.
Right.
I'm saying it's 150 AD.
Okay.
And so I'm not saying let's write it off. I'm saying it's in the canon for a reason, and that reason is load-bearing for how we should understand it.
Okay.
Right?
Fair enough.
I'm not dismissing it. I'm not undermining its value. A late 2nd century dating of composition does not undermine its canonical authority.
See, and that's the question, right? Because a lot of people would say it would. I agree with you. I don't think it does.
That's because they're bad Protestants. And they have this magical date that everything has to have been written before 100 AD for it to be legitimately
canonical and binding. Right.
Right.
It certainly becomes a lot more complicated in terms of, how did the book get here, or how did the letter get here, and like, what does it mean for us today, right? And at least when I'm preaching and when I'm teaching, I don't go in that direction, right? It just doesn't seem like it would be for my everyday flock. These are the questions that the scholars are trying to help, and once they figured it out, it'll eventually filter down my way.
Well, that's why I'm doing the podcast.
That's right.
I was thinking of articles to go along with James 2. I thought about this idea of optimization. And Anne Helen Peterson wrote a great article for her Substack in 2023 called Optimization Sinkholes. And Todd, I think you'll relate to this. Don't comment quite yet. Because she starts off by lamenting her search for the perfect coffee maker. She tried coffee makers recommended by the New York Times on like the Wirecutter kind of reviews.
They don't know much.
She tried pour over coffee, you name it. She tried everything. But she drives home one thought, and she writes, "The point is, there's no such thing as the perfect coffee making situation. There will always be compromises, but that understanding defies optimization culture, whose core tenet is that there is one item, one process, one routine with the capacity to blunt every cumbersome corner of our day. Its logic promises that if we amass or uncover or commit to enough of these hacks, our lives will become seamless, manageable, easy. One underappreciated consequence of believing there is such a thing as the one best way in every aspect of life is subsequently living with the unyielding pressure to discover it and the inevitable and perpetual frustration of failing to achieve it." She writes, "And not only frustration, it produces anxiety, fear, compulsiveness, resignation, and ultimately self-loathing. If there is one best way, how will I know it? If I have not found it, have I failed? And is it my fault?" Remodeling is the attempt to find the one best way with our physical spaces. Wellness culture is the one best way with our bodies. Productivity culture is the one best way with our work lives. And like all quests for optimization, they're sinkholes. You think you're standing on solid ground, just scrolling your phone, dreaming about a steam oven and downloading a new list-making app, and listening to someone on TikTok emphatically tell you you're doing blank wrong. But then you look up and realize you're not just trying to make a few things better or easier or more straightforward. You're dissatisfied with your whole damn life and have been for some time. So my question for you are, for both of you, are there any products or things in your life that y'all are striving to optimize? And I think Todd,
Y'all are both looking at me.
Yeah.
Her coffee intro is 100% me. I optimize my coffee in every way, shape, or form. I had a coffee conversion experience at the 21st Street Coffee and Tea in the Strip District of Pittsburgh.
Yes.
How old were you?
Approximately 15 years ago.
Okay.
Where I had a cup of coffee that tasted like sweet blueberries. And ever since then, I've been on a kind of quest toward optimization of coffee. I have fancy coffee makers. I have a variety of ways to make coffee. I have scales. I have timers. I also roast my own coffee.
Okay.
So that I can obtain the very, very fancy beans from the very fancy regions of the world that make the best cup of coffee.
You're a coffee connoisseur.
I am something far worse than a coffee connoisseur.
Yes. Well, you also grind. What is your hand?
Even while we're
like,
So even while recording, I have with me my hand burr grinder.
Right.
Which was not cheap, and nevertheless, it grinds the beans quite well.
Yeah.
So, but you said you have a bunch of different ways for making coffee, though, and different tools. From an optimization standpoint, have those just been things bought on the way to making your perfect cup of coffee, or are you just trying to optimize the coffee that you want with the mood that you're in or the situation that you have?
No, so Coffee Nuts will tell you it's actually a way of optimizing getting the best out of the bean that you can. So coffee is inorganic, and so there is no. So to her point, there is no one process. It's messier, but there is a best process for a given bean.
Okay.
Whether it be recipes for a given flavor that you want.
Yeah.
Flavor is a wide range, but yes. And it's basically the science of extracting a solid soluble in liquid as best you can.
So there are millions of optimization sinkholes within coffee.
You know, the rabbit hole of coffee brewing is a very deep one.
Hey, your name is Todd Brewer. I
brew. It's true.
Yeah.
He's not making beer.
Yeah.
I'm not making beer. I'm making coffee. Yeah. So I definitely, I'm actually always optimizing everything as best I can.
You're a 3.
I mean,
for fear of touching on the Enneagram.
The Enneagram? Yeah, the thing I don't think is like reliable or whatever. Yeah, it's fine.
In my world, the optimization, I think home automation stuff is really, really cool. And so I have, the Google Home system, right? Like I have been slowly, the optimization isn't my work. The optimization is what I'm doing to slowly convert my house into a sort of more smart house. And so, I've got an app on my phone, and what can I control with my app? I can control lights in about half my house. I can control ceiling fans. I can control radios and televisions. I can even control like a front porch lights, Christmas lights that are outside.
Yeah.
And one of the things I have that I built is a big marquee sign. It has our family last name on it, and it hangs up in our living room as a decoration. And I've got it set up so that I have to just say, activation word, turn on the marquee, and then the lights pop on.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea that, all of these different tasks across the home, I would love to have them automated and optimized so that I have as little work to do as possible to get up and go and change things.
But does the app ever crash, or
Yes.
does it ever not work?
Well,
it's all through the Wi-Fi, and if there's a glitch in the Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
the whole thing goes
It's
crazy.
kaput.
It all falls apart.
Yeah.
I think the like fiction of automation that is that, or of optimization. Sorry.
Yeah.
The fiction of optimization is that you sort of think that if you get you optimize to a point and then you're fine, like you've got it.
You'll achieve it.
And and that you can like get there. What you discover is that the quest for optimization never ends.
The goalpost
and
is
it's
always moving.
requiring more and
Right.
more and more and more work.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's not enough to have a pour over coffee set.
Mm-hmm.
You also need certain kinds of filters that are made by certain kinds of companies, or you need certain kinds of beans from certain regions of the world, regardless of whether or not they're having a drought at the time. Like, so the rabbit hole keeps going, and at every step, it requires work.
Yeah.
Like it's a pain in the butt to make coffee every morning if you're trying to do it the right way. Like you have to wake up, you have to boil, you have to measure, you've got to pre-wet your
filter.
your filter. It's a multi-step process that is far more difficult than simply opening the Folgers, scooping out what you think is right. Like, because I wait to the gram,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
it's great, but it's work.
And not
Right.
only is it work, it's also money.
Yeah. It's expensive.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's, it's the same for me, right? Like I've got this done. It's like, oh, but now I need to automate my blinds. Like that's a whole new frontier. And then automate my washer and dryer and,
Yeah.
automate my refrigerator and automate these other pieces if I'm really going to go that far. And, well, I don't know that I can afford to do much more than I can do one piece at a time.
Yeah.
But there's always more. There's always this, which brings me at Callie. Like, what
Yeah.
do you optimize? Like, what is your optimal thing?
So mine is I try to get the most out of dating apps.
Oh, boy.
But without paying any of the developers like a single penny. Like I want to find like what are the loopholes. And so there was a way that you could like reset the algorithm. And it went viral on TikTok, and then there were subreddits about it. And I've gone to the TikToks and I've gone to the subreddits because I'm trying to find some sort of loophole to make the algorithm give me essentially better people or or just make the app easier. But at the same time, I'm trying to find
While also
love.
not paying.
Yes, while also not paying. But
Right.
then that only gets me so far. Basically, it doesn't get me far at all because the purpose of these apps is to make money, not actually find love.
Yeah, exactly.
And so-
if you find love, you don't need the app anymore.
Exactly. And then so eventually it just leads me to subscribing for the pro
Right.
apps.
Pro features.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point about what apps are supposed to do. You were supposed to be optimizing your search for love, right? And it makes sense to me that, in the sinkhole of all these things, that the thing we thought would optimize the search for love has actually made it more harder.
Yes.
Right? More difficult to find love.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not that you're just meeting someone in person. It's that you're having to curate so much. Yeah, in the whole process to find it. To find
Yeah.
someone.
I'm making my profile. I'm asking my friends for how can I make my profile better? What can I do to seem more
right.
presentable or more likable?
If there's a pet in the picture, do I get more swipes or something like that? Or,
Which photo is going to get me more likes? And then do I put that photo in a different order? It's all a game, essentially.
So, what does optimization have to do with James? So you chose this to sort of work together. What's going on there?
It's this sense that optimization is about works. It's about what you do to make your life better. And so, and then when you look at James is talking about works in terms of faith.
I like it because what it does, it's certainly the popular readings of James. James becomes the tool by which a lot of people try to optimize their Christian life. And it goes back towards that conversation I had with my fellow Christian. I'm a Galatians Christian. She was a James Christian. And it's like, just tell me what to do, right? And that's fundamentally an optimization question, right? I want to get to the core of what I'm supposed to do. I don't want there to be questions. I just want to do the thing. And James can be helpful in that to some degree. But the problem is James is only one portion of a much wider ethical view in the New Testament. And we don't get all our answers from James. And just in the same way, what it means to be a Christian in the world, it's hard, it's complicated. These things are not easy, and they aren't designed to be easy. And so any attempt to sort of optimize it, it can undermine, right, what the Holy Spirit is doing in any given moment. Sometimes the best thing to do is to be wasteful, to be slow, to not be optimal, because, well, that's what love looks like a lot of the time. And so I think it's a great pairing of those two ideas. Like, if you want to be an optimal Christian or an optimized Christian, you're going to go to James, but you will have asked the wrong question to get you there. Instead, what does it look like to be faithful? That, I think, is the better question. And sometimes it's not efficient.
Yeah, if I think about sort of James and Paul, or faith and works, on the question of optimization, I would say you can optimize works, you cannot optimize faith.
Yeah.
I think faith is or is not. There is no middle. And works, you can qualify, you can measure, the limiting reagent is time and energy, but for faith, it can't be, it isn't quantified in the same way works can be. It's either there or it's not there. And it's either dynamic or it's not. And yeah. And I'd rather live an unoptimized life than an optimized life, outside of my coffee.
Yeah, I was about to say, except when it comes to your coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Terrible Parables. You can find us on the web at ember.com. Audio production for Terrible Parables is provided by TJ Hester. Please leave us a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you've had a not so terrible time.